In lesson 5.5, we're going to be revisiting tenths and hundredths by adding them. You will need your whiteboard marker, your Math 2 journal. Let's go ahead and start with a warm-up. What I'd like for you to do is to take each one of these fractions and change it so it has a denominator of 10 or 100. Because we can't turn fractions into decimals unless they have a denominator of tenths, hundredths, thousands, and so forth. So, for example, if I multiply the bottom by 5, the denominator, and I multiply the numerator by 5, I would get 5/10. Now I can write 5/10 as a decimal. Would you go ahead on your whiteboard and number 1 and number 2? Change 2/5 so that it has tenths, or you can do hundredths, and the same thing for 1/5. Go ahead and pause your video. All right, so if you take 2/5, if you multiply the denominator times 2 and the numerator times 2, you would get 4/10. And then as a decimal, it would look like that. Here again, we multiply by 2 on the denominator, 2 in the numerator, 2/10. If I changed any of those to hundredths, it'd be 50 hundredths, 40 hundredths, and 20 hundredths. Just like this is 2 dimes, 4 dimes, etc. Go ahead and wipe off your whiteboard. I would like you to write the first 5 multiples of each number. Here is an example. The first multiple of 6 is 6. The next one is 12, 18, 24, and 30. Would you please now write the first 5 multiples of 12 and 8? Go ahead and pause your video. All right, if we go ahead with 12s, 12, 24, 36, 48, 60. And lastly, 8, 16, 24, 32, and 40. All right, let's go ahead, stay on your whiteboard, but let's get into the lesson of adding tenths and hundredths. As another warm-up problem not a warm-up problem, but a lesson problem on your whiteboard, this word problem says Alex made a poster with 100 paper clips for the 100th day of school celebration. 2/10 of the paper clips were gold. 45 hundredths of the paper clips were silver. The rest were other colors. Write a number model with an unknown to represent the fraction of paper clips on Alex's poster that are silver or gold. So on your whiteboard, would you please write 2/10? We're going to add that together with the ones that were silver, which is 45 hundredths. And the unknown, I'm just going to put a lowercase a for Alex. Now, the first thing I noticed from previously adding fractions, that these denominators are not the same. So let's go ahead and change tenths to hundredths. So what would I multiply 10 by to give me 100? You're right, 10 times 10. So if I multiply the denominator times 10, I'm going to multiply the numerator times 10. And 2 times 10 is 20. In other words, 2/10, which would be like having 2 dimes, is the same thing as 20 pennies, because it takes 100 pennies to make $1. So now I can add together the 2 fractions that have the same denominator. 2/10 is the same thing as 20 hundredths, so now I'm going to go ahead and add. Keep 100 as my denominator, and 45 plus 20, maybe some of you are doing this in your head, is 65. 65 hundredths. And we know we can write that as a decimal as well. Anytime our denominator is tenths or hundredths. Go ahead and erase your whiteboard again. It says use what you know about equivalent fractions to add. Write an equation to show your work. So it asks me to take the equation 5/10. So if I were to think about that, 5/10 plus 27/100, what does that equal? We're going to move on into our journal. And we're going to move to journal page 164. At the top it says adding tenths and hundredths. Use what you know about equivalent fractions to add. Write an equation to show your work. So we're going to go ahead. And right now I'm going to just change 5/10 to hundredths when I write this in words. So 5/10 would be the same 5 times. So see the same thing as 50 hundredths or 50 pennies. So go ahead and write 50 hundredths plus 27 hundredths equals, and let's go ahead and solve. What is 50 plus 27? Some of you may be able to do that in your head. If not, go ahead and add it over on the side. It would be 77 hundredths. All right, let's continue. Number 2, 16 hundredths plus, and let's change 7/10 to hundredths. 7/10 and 70 hundredths is the same, 70 hundredths. Go ahead if you need to add over on the side. Would equal 86 hundredths. Now, we're going to make it a little bit easier and not make us write all those next few out. Over here, right next to it says 8 hundredths plus 6/10. I know that 6/10, I can put a 0 behind it. 60 hundredths would be the same. I could multiply the top and the bottom number by 10. So go ahead and write the equation 8 hundredths, and let's go ahead and convert 6/10 into 60 hundredths. Now I can go ahead and solve. 80 plus 6 is 86, and hundredths remains the same. Number 4, 42 hundredths. Write this in your journal on page 164. Plus, let's change 9/10 to hundredths. Multiply the top number and the bottom number, the numerator and the denominator by 10, and I get 90 hundredths. Keep the denominator the same and add the numerators. 42 and 90. 132 hundredths. In other words, this would be a fraction that is equal more or is more than one whole. If I were to change it to a mixed number, it would equal 1 and 32 hundredths. All right. 3/10 plus 50 hundredths. Let's go ahead and change that 3/10. Let's multiply the numerator and denominator by 10 to get 30 hundredths plus 50 hundredths equals 50 plus 30 equals 80 hundredths. Again, at any point in time, pause the video if I'm going too quickly for you. Let's see, we are moving on to number 6. We just did this one. Now we are adding 4 fractions together, and I notice that one of them is not, 2 of them, do not have a denominator of 100. So as I write them down, I'm going to change them so that they have a denominator of 100. So 1/10. I'm going to multiply the denominator and the numerator times 10. So 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths plus 5 hundredths. And 20/10, I'm going to multiply the top numerator and the bottom denominator times 10. I would get 200 hundredths. Be careful on that one. And 55 hundredths. Now, my denominator stays 100. So I have hundredths. Now I just need to add together all four numerators. Well, I could do 10 plus 5 is 15. Add that to 200. That'd be 215. And then go ahead and add the 55. 5 plus 5 is 0. Carry your 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Plus 5 is 7. 270 hundredths. And again, that is an improper fraction where the numerator is larger than the denominator. If you wanted to, you could change that. It equals 2 whole plus 70 hundredths more. And lastly, notice we're mixing with, adding mixed numbers, I should say, whole number plus a fraction. So let's go ahead and write 1. We're going to change 2/10 so that it has a denominator of 100. Multiply the numerator and the denominator times 10. 2 times 10 is 20. 10 times 10 is 100. Now they have the same denominator, and I can go ahead and add. Add your whole numbers. 1 plus 6 is 7. Hundredths stays the same. 35 plus 20. Again, you may be able to do this in your head. Would be 55 hundredths. And lastly, Allie shaded 4/10 of a hundredths grid. Tarun shaded 32 hundredths of the same grid. How much of the grid did they shade in all? Notice 4/10 and 32 hundredths. I'm going to change 4/10 so that it is hundredths. And all I have to do is multiply by 10 to get 40 hundredths, and then add together 32 hundredths. Line up those decimal points and go ahead and add. So I would take 40 hundredths plus 32 hundredths equals X. And we have the answer as 72 hundredths of the grid. How did I explain my answer? I changed tenths to hundredths by multiplying by 10. All right, so go ahead, go to your Schoology and see what else you need to do for this lesson.